Welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes in the New Testament. 30 Minutes in the New Testament is a 1517 Podcast Network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. While you're over there, make sure you check out everything else that 1517 is doing. Academies, events, articles, all that stuff. Check it all out. And while you're checking that out, of course, don't miss the donate link. It's in the right-hand corner. It's right there. Click it, and you can support the work of this show and all the other shows and everything else that 1517 is doing. And we would greatly appreciate that. And thank you so much to those of you who already do that. Guys, we are in Matthew chapter 23. We're at the tail end. We just got through the 7 woes. So Jesus has lit the Pharisees up, the chief priests up. He has said a lot of very harsh things to them. And now we get to verse 37 where the tone changes. So he has dished out all these condemnations. He has exposed all the things that God is unpleased with about the way that this whole system has been operated. And I think it's safe to say in 37, you kind of see how this is actually not only something that he is angry about, but is actually heartbroken about it as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, Dan. I mean, in some sense, chapter 23 is kind of a good example of what we often talk about here, which is kind of law and gospel. Because, for the first 36 verses, it's pretty much just all condemning law. I mean, there's no wiggle room at all. He does not give them any sympathy for the ways that they have taken advantage and exploited God's people. And yet, even still, you can see that he is delivering this with a sense of heartbreak, because he says in verse 37, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" So a couple things right out of the gate here. We do see that his desire has always been, as we hear throughout all of the prophets, especially the prophet Isaiah, God is outstretching his arm to his people, calling them to repentance. It's why he sends the prophets. I mean, they're constantly going to him saying, "You're headed in the wrong direction. You're headed for destruction. I don't want to see destruction happen to you. Come home. Come home. Gather under my wings." That's always been God's desire for his people. And yet at the same time, he says, he kind of leaves a little bit of an open invitation at the very end here, where he says, even though your house is going to be left to you desolate, I'll tell you, if you say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," well, then the result of all this could be quite a bit different. There's still time to repent. There's still time to believe that I really am who I say I am. You can come home still, is what he's essentially saying.
Yeah, I think that the reason this kind of hits as this sort of heartbreaking thing is that you do see the long suffering nature of God, because this as he cries out for Jerusalem, this is called the lament over Jerusalem, right? So he's lamenting this. And he does this, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, it's the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it." And then it says, "How often I would have." But what is being said there is, in spite of that, that is what you do, and still, and yet, I have come to you over and over again, trying to gather you to myself, even though you are the ones who have historically killed my messengers. I have tried this time and time again. And the big thing here is this, is that you're not willing to do it. You will not do it. Now, this is not some kind of Jesus.
I was wondering who's going to touch this one.
Yeah, this is not Jesus being and that blasted free will got in the way. That's not it. This is this is them saying that you are not willing because your will is opposed to this, right? Your will is bound. It is in opposition to what I'm trying to do, so much so that you would kill those who would bring you this message.
See, if you're looking for your contribution in your conversion in this passage, all you're going to see is your sin. So if you are a Christian and you're searching for what was my contribution to becoming a Christian, you should actually go here. Not because it proves that you have free will, but because it proves that your contribution to being brought into the family of God is only your sin and your rejection and your willingness to kill the prophets.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is no different than the parable we just went through a couple weeks ago of Jesus sending, the master sending the servants out and then sending his son out. Everyone is rejected, and finally the son is killed.
Yep.
And this is the same thing here. And then you have to look at who's actually doing the positive action here. The positive action is literally Jesus saying, I'm the one doing the positive action here. I am the one gathering you, huddling you under my wing. But you're that chick that just rejects. And then I also think the other thing to put here is Jesus also says how has he tried to gather Jerusalem by sending preachers to it.
Yeah.
Now, what can be rejected? Like the unmediated power of God, can that be rejected? No. But what can be rejected? The means, right? And the means is the proclaimed word. So you can look at the means itself and you can say that means is, I hate it. It's gone. But it's not like, God is actually reaching out with a physical hand and grabbing you. If that were the case, there'd be nothing. And then finally, when you are gathered, and he says this is going to happen, if you look at 39, despite your rejection, eventually for some, this is going to happen because eventually some, his overpowering arm is going to reach out. It is going to gather them, and they are going to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
That's what happened to their fellow Pharisee Nicodemus. I mean, we know of various instances where there are people that were crushed by the word of law and were brought to faith by the word of the gospel.
Yeah, this might be the moment that Joseph of Arimathea was like, you know what?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm ready to say that now. I feel it coming out of my lips, almost involuntarily. Yeah. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Well, and we know that from 1 Corinthians 15 that after his resurrection, at one point over 500 at one time that do see him, right, do say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Yeah. I think just to stay in this point for just a second, too, is if you're you should, people will use this and be like, see, this is the thing. Jesus is not going to violate your free will choice. See it right here.
He's a gentleman.
This is not. This is not it.
Well, Scott, this was common terminology when I was growing up.
Really? So I love my evangelical naivete. Every time you guys come up with these things, I just think it's like a funny joke. I'm like, that's so funny. You guys are like, no, it's real. Oh,
did you not hear that statement all the time?
Oh yeah, yes.
Of course.
God would never make anyone do anything. And then I don't know how you read the Bible and come to this conclusion. But that's the exact opposite takeaway. You have to understand that no. How bound is your will? Your will is so not free that you would kill the messengers of God. That's how bound it is. Like, this is not you operating in freedom. This is you operating in bondage. When the Lord sends his prophet, his messenger, his preacher, and you hate the message so much that you say, off with his head, that will is pretty bound, okay? And that's what's going on here.
Yep, that's exactly right. And, it's interesting in the language of the parables, there are times where, with the telling of the parable of the wedding banquet, the master says to his servants, compel those on the streets to come in. The word for compel is it's not just invite. It's stronger than that. God is not opposed to doing what he wants. So this category of he's a gentleman just doesn't work in the way that people will want to use that language.
Go out into the street and drag them to the wedding.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what God has to do for every sinner that's saved, and by the way.
Then dress them, whether they want to be dressed or not. And for the one that chooses not to be dressed, right? He didn't get to choose to be dressed. He rejected the dressing. He rejected the robe.
Yeah.
Toss him out, or they'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You got a lot of choice here, and it's all sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
True enough. True enough. So we enter into Matthew chapter 24. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. Let me just stop there. Just important to note once again, all the stuff he's been saying is him holding court over their temple, or what they thought was their temple. I mean, it's just the chutzpah to like stand up there and be like, I'm condemning this whole thing.
Yeah, this is also interesting that the disciples are like, man, this is a really nice temple we got here. You check out this building.
Yeah,
Jesus is like, yeah, it'd be a shame if something happened to it.
So he answered them, verse 2, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down.
That is funny, Dan. They're coming to him. This is Jesus. Like, this is 3 years in to this, and it's like they don't know him at all. Like, somebody comes up to him, he's like, hey, man, do you see that building over? Isn't that a nice building? Hey, do you see that building over there? This is the guy who walks around with literally no money in his pocket. Anytime he's asked to do anything with money, he's got to, like, go send somebody off to go catch a fish or something like that. And they're like, isn't that a beautiful building? He's like, give me a break.
Jesus is like, yeah, oh, you like that building? I don't like it too much because
It's not going to be standing for long.
it's not going to be there very much longer.
Well, and not for nothing, this is one of the reasons that the Pharisees and the scribes bring up for justification to crucify him.
Yeah, they don't like.
He
this.
said
They don't
he was
like
going to
this.
destroy the temple. Now, of course, he doesn't actually say he's going to destroy the temple right then, but he certainly does prophesy that, yes, this temple is going down. Of course, we do know that it went down in AD 70 at the hands of the Romans, and it has never been rebuilt.
Yeah, dude, literally scraped that thing off the side of a mountain. Like this whole like no stone left on another is exactly what
Is
happened.
literal. And we know that not just because Scripture prophesies this. We know this because Josephus tells us in great detail that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
Oh, I mean, the ruins tell us too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the ruins are pretty good evidence too.
Yeah.
And so verse 3, it says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? Now, very important to answer the question, what things?
That whole temple destruction thing. They were
Yes.
like they're like that seems like a big thing that you just said was going to happen. Like when exactly did that happen?
So whatever he's going to answer, you know that it's going to have something to do with answering that question. When is the temple going to be destroyed? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, it's interesting, that question, it's almost like the disciples can't imagine a world that goes on in existence without a temple.
Yeah, so they think they're asking him one question, but they're asking two questions, right? So like
That's right.
In their mind, they're like, "Oh, the temple's going to be destroyed. That's the end of everything when that happens." And so and Jesus is like, different questions. Those are not the same. Those are not the same event.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And so Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Now, again, if we reference Josephus, talking about the history of that time, we know that everything Jesus says here actually was happening very much so in that part of the world.
But not
We
only,
know
not
that there
only
were
that,
earthquakes. We know that there were famines. Why was the famine happening? Partly because the city was under siege from the Romans, and there were people starving to death, so much so that they were committing cannibalism against their own family members.
Yeah, I mean the people take this and look. They'll pick up a newspaper, or maybe not anymore. They'll open Google, and
Twitter.
And they'll,
Don't people?
yeah.
I don't have Twitter, but don't people get their news on Twitter?
They'll get on Twitter, and they'll be like,
X.
See-
Sorry.
"Yeah, you'll see." They'll say, "You see this? A lot of wars and rumors of wars, don't you think? A lot of
Yep.
kingdoms against kingdoms. Hey, did you hear this? There's a famine over here in this place over there.
Yeah.
Did you hear this? Big earthquake over in Tibet or whatever." You're like, "All right, listen to me. This is true all the time. All right, like this is true since the fall.
Never
Okay,
not
the,
been
the,
true.
the Bible is just full of all of this, and so this is why when you're talking about the last days, like all days are the last days, right? This is what they are, and what Jesus is doing here is saying, like, look, all of this stuff is going to happen. And they miss the most important thing that Jesus says here, which is not any of this, which can describe any 100-year period in human history,
Yep.
but instead see that no one leads you to astray, for many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ. That's the thing that you really want to watch out for. Like, that's the one.
Well, I'm just trying to if you look at the structure of how all this is written, the people that are saying I'm the Christ are going to use the fact that there are wars and rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes to bolster their argument that they are the Christ.
Yep.
Yes.
And they're going to use it to bolster their argument and attempt to lead you astray.
And they're going to do it by saying the end of all things is at hand, because
Yes.
look around.
Which is in my very limited experience by sitting in my grandmother's living room as she's watching TBN, how this has always been used. And honestly, the people that are saying, I am Christ, I am the Christ, are usually people that are also saying they are Christians.
Yes.
Leading people astray to a Christ that isn't Christ.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't to say that when these kinds of signs are happening, that it's inappropriate to be reminded that the end could come at any time.
Correct.
That's kind of the point. That, like, when you do see these signs, now, if somebody is using it to then say, therefore worship me, therefore submit to me as your Lord, that's really bad. But
and it's literally called the beginning, so you don't know. And if you relate this to birth pains, if anybody has ever had a wife here who's had a baby, you don't actually know where you are in the beginning, middle, or end until there's a baby in a doctor's hands.
Exactly right. And that's, I think, the whole point of this.
I mean, my wife, with our first one, we went into the hospital 4 times with false labor.
Well, and you have to recognize, like, it will be the apostles that will say things like, in these last days.
Yeah.
Speaking of the days that they are living in. And so, like, you have to understand that, like, since Christ, all days are referred to as the last days.
That's right.
That's what it is.
That is the New Testament way of speaking.
Yes, until he comes again. But don't worry, guys, because Jesus has some super comforting words for these particular men coming up.
Okay, just one more thing.
And I got one more thing too, Scott.
You guys said at the beginning that they're asking one question that is really 2, and Jesus is sort of trying to answer it that way. They just asked about the destruction of the temple. They say, tell us when these things will be. Eric told us that that's going to be around 70 AD, right? This is around 33-ish AD here now. 30, I mean, depending on how they messed up the calendar, anywhere between like 30 and 35 AD, right? Here. Which means that in about 35 years, give or take, all this bad stuff in Jerusalem is going to go down, right? And the life expectancy for these apostles that are asking these questions is also probably about another 35 years from this point if these guys are somewhere in their 20s, right?
Yeah.
And so the next point from verse 9 on that we'll pick up with all that, let's just say it this way, the end of all their things before they wake up in glory, maybe about 35 years from the point they're asking this question.
Yeah, for the most part.
25 to 35 years from the time they're asking this question.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, for the most part, with the exception of maybe the Apostle John,
right.
That is pretty much the case.
This is another one of those texts. I know we've pointed these out like throughout Matthew, but of the sorts of things that you're not promised in the Christian life, and then the sorts of things that you kind of are promised in the Christian life. And you're about to get another one of those kind of sections where you're like, look, man, you're not signing up for something that is promising you ease here.
Well, straight up, if you're a Christian because you go to Joel Osteen's church and he's convinced you that being a Christian is going to give you your best life now, you're probably not reading the New Testament.
Yeah.
It's going to be
that's
hard to
not what you
reconcile
promised.
that with these kinds of promises that Jesus gives
Right.
to his disciples.
Yeah, and this is informative for the church now, too, who somehow thinks that it should have maybe some things that it has had for a little while, as if it acts as if those things are guarantees or promises, whether that's influence or security. And I'm
Yeah,
telling you, it's
that's
not.
not the promise.
It's
I,
not.
I just I wanted to reiterate something you mentioned earlier, Dan, that like this is describing things that do happen all throughout history. It's not merely one time kind of thing. And I've always in this context, we actually went over this in the Book of Revelation when we went through it last time. But in 536 A.D., we know that there was like this terribly cataclysmic volcano that erupted in Iceland, and that led to such a dense fog that for 18 months there was no light in Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, which led to significant temperature drops. It actually snowed that year in the summer in China. There were crop failures, mass starvation, and it ended up ushering in the bubonic plague in 541 that led to about 1/3 to 1/2 of the population of the Roman Empire perishing. Now, why do I bring that up? No doubt, if you were a Christian in 536, you have to be convinced the end is nigh.
Oh, how
There's
many
just
people were
no
convinced
doubt.
in 2020, when was COVID 2020, that the
Yeah.
end was nigh?
Yeah.
And that wasn't even like marginally as bad as what you just described.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my point in bringing this up is it's, I promise you, not gleeful. It's just to acknowledge that these kinds of cataclysmic events that Jesus talks about and alludes to here are not unusual in the span of human history. There are moments like this. And on the one hand, there's something appropriate about being reminded that the end could be near, and yet at the same time having the humility to recognize that we really don't know exactly when the end is coming.
C.S. Lewis coined the term chronological snobbery. The long and short of that term is that the modern man, whatever age you are, the modern man, right? For him, it would have been 60 years ago. But the modern man always thinks that the time they're living in is, the ultimate time.
Yes.
As far as advancements, as far as like human morality. And so when they see something go a little bit bad in their time, they always then also think it's the worst ever.
Yeah,
because
things are going to hell in a handbasket.
You're a chronological snob. You don't have a
Yeah.
view of all of history, right?
Yeah.
And so with a view of all of history, you know that, yeah, you could describe some of these things as happening now, but they could be more aptly described of happening sometime in the past that you're not aware of,
Yeah.
more likely,
Yeah.
and have already happened and gone. But then you think into that, the way God's view of history, is your view of history is your lifetime. No matter how much
Yeah.
you study the past before your lifetime, you view history as your lifetime. Well, God also views history as his lifetime. So,
Yeah.
these,
A day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is as a day, etc.
and you just don't know.
Yeah.
You just
No,
don't know.
and that's, if anything, we should just be humble in regard to these things and in regard to these signs when they come, and just continually say, "Come, Lord Jesus." Like that's appropriate. That's an
Right.
appropriate prayer all the
whole
time.
point of all of this is just to not live as if today or tomorrow matter as much as the life that you'll have in glory with him forever.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Amen to that. So Jesus then does promise to his disciples more exciting things. He says in verse 9, "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come."
This is not a great recruitment kind of talk here, right? It's like, all right, this gospel's got to go out throughout the entire world, but just so you know, they are going to hate you, and they are going to kill you. Okay, so who's ready to sign up?
The juxtaposition here is just radical because he seems to give the most defeatist picture of what his church is going to look like. And nevertheless, he says, but the fact is, this gospel of the kingdom is going to go out to the entire world.
Well, one of the clear signs that you're actually preaching the gospel is that people hate you.
Hopefully, if they do, for the gospel and not because you're a jerk. But yes,
Well, yeah. I mean, well, okay, granted, you could be a jerk and preach the gospel. People hate you because you're the jerk. But all things being equal, that you're just like normal dude going about your business, preaching the gospel, not really trying to offend anybody any other way, but you're literally just preaching the words of Christ and the gospel and the kingdom of God.
you will get resistance.
Yes. People are going to hate you for it.
Yep.
And even people that you maybe your whole life thought were on your side.
Yep.
I'm not speaking from experience.
Yeah. And also, like, isn't the Bible interesting? Like, if you were trying to write some propaganda about like how to like get more people to sign up for this religion, like this seems like something you don't include.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. This is a bad recruitment poster.
Yeah. Like, it's like, how are we supposed to get more people on board for this? Like, maybe, hey, Matt.
The recruitment poster is like, good news, you're going to be successful. Bad news, you're going to get killed.
Well, and this is right in line with what Jesus does. There's never any hint of false advertising from Jesus about what the cost will be to be a member of his kingdom. Like this is just never, as a matter of fact, every time like a crowd starts really swelling around Jesus, it seems it's at that moment that he's like, what's the most controversial thing I can say to them right now to thin this herd out a little bit? I mean, because it happens all the time. And that's something that, to me anyway, is one of the reasons that his word is all the more trustworthy, because I know I'm hearing truth. It's not something that you would use to recruit people. It's not.
Yeah. And the thing, just so people know too, like this in verse 13, I think this can be, I've heard this verse used to really mess people up. The one who endures to the end will be saved. So you have to do this enduring. I mean, all this means is like the one who at the end of all this is still believing, the one who is still has their faith in this gospel, that person will ultimately be saved. That's what it's about. Like, is it going to be pleasant? No. Is the price tag high? Yes, it is. The person who clings to this faith till the end, though, they will be saved.
So you could also think of it this way: if this is really messing you up, you can, and it's not a bad way to translate it either. It's just vernacularly it works better to say, "But the one who endures to the end will be saved," because it just linguistically for modern English works well and people get it. But you could say this in this way: the one who is endured to the end will be saved.
Yeah, that's right.
And it would not be a bad way to translate this at all. It'd be as accurate as this here. It just doesn't work as well linguistically with English to do that. And so people translate it this way. But the implication here is the fact that it's the gospel, the proclamation of the gospel that endures you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that you have to understand is that it's good for you to hear this. It's good for the church to hear this, because this, in varying degrees, is true about you. But you have to remember that Jesus is talking to his disciples, and this is like absolutely true of them, right? Like,
yes.
so am I?
That was my point earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Am I going to be put to death for the gospel? Well, maybe, but maybe not. Probably not.
But they are going to be.
But they certainly are going to be, and so
they are going to be, right in that area of time that the destruction of the temple happens, probably.
Correct.
Right in that ballpark.
Yeah. So this is written for you. It's document. Matthew has written this down for you, but Jesus is saying it to his disciples.
Yes. Again, that's we say this on Tough Text a lot. You not only have to sort of know what this is saying to you, but you have to try to understand to whom it was said originally and what was being said to them. Mm-hmm. This all started as a question asked by the disciples and being answered to the disciples.
Yeah, and
primarily.
And I mean, the truth is that they're like, hey, okay, so like maybe they're starting to wrap their head around like, I think this guy might leave and come back. Like, so that might be something that's happening here. It seems like he's said this a lot. They seem to think, which I think most people would, that they'll be around for that. Of course, Jesus knows that this is not how this is going to go, right? Like, no, I'm not going to be gone for a month and then return. like you're going to go do this gospel work and die doing it, and then you'll come home to me. But the second coming is not something that you are going to witness. It's going to happen after you're all martyred, right?
Yeah.
So, and we're out of time. But what you're going to see as he continues to go through this is like he's going to talk about the abomination of desolation, the second coming of the Son of Man, all this kind of stuff. And so this then is more sort of like given to us, right? So we get to see some of this stuff coming up, which is again, Eric and I are probably going to argue that this has largely happened. So,
Yeah.
So
I mean,
come back
spoiler
for that.
alert.
Have your eschatology, tweak.
Is it going to argue with each other or argue together?
I think we're
argue
going to argue together.
We're going to argue
with
together.
united force.
That you don't.
All right.
That this is probably not something you're on the lookout for. But
I'll try not to be a dissenter.
Yeah, we'll tell you. We'll
That'd
tell
be
you.
fun, though.
We'll tell you when we think this happened. But you have to wait around until next episode for that, guys. I will see you then.
All right, sounds good.